Did Darwin really say that? Not exactly, but actually pretty close to it. First, the story. I'm an outdoorsman. I honorably served in the Marine Corps. So what's the chance you think I would be introducing a video on empathy? Because I'm a father, and I now know how profound the evidence is. So for my children, I invite you to listen on. Here's what Darwin actually said. Those communities which included the greatest number of the most sympathetic members would flourish best and rear the greatest number of offspring. And what Darwin called sympathy, today we would call empathy. In other words, compassion eats survival of the fittest for breakfast. Here's what's going to make this easy. As you're about to learn, as Darwin came to understand, we're born naturally empathetic. Allow me to ask you a question. What's your single greatest wish for your child? I can tell you everyone comes to the same place, for them to be happy. A study at Harvard in its 8th decade asked the question, what contributes to the good life? The answer they found, one thing, relationships. And the best way to teach how to have successful relationships is something we call social emotional learning, or SEL. And the base of SEL, empathy. But more, study after study have demonstrated significantly improved social skills, emotional skills, attitudes, behavior, academic performance is just too new to have much evidence on career effectiveness. But what do you think it will show? I'll reference the biggest study. Joseph Durlach and Roger Weisberg in February 2011, 8 years ago, reported the results of a meta-analysis of 213 school-based SEL programs involving almost 300,000 kindergarten through high school students. Compared to students who were not in these programs, SEL participants demonstrated significantly improved skills across every domain I just described, including an 11-point gain in achievement. That's from a C+ to an A-. Convinced the greatest gift you could give your child is the gift of empathy? Two of the most respected researchers on the planet in SEL, world-renowned experts, Dr. Kimberly Schonert-Reichelt and Dr. Ross Thompson, have won award after award, appeared in almost every major news outlet and publications. Their bios are 10 paragraphs long. They're here to teach you.
So I'm going to talk to you about empathy. Well, some have actually called empathy the most important of all personality traits. In fact, it's one in which I've been studying for about 3 decades and have learned so much.
Empathy is our emotional connection to another person's experience. And it involves both knowing and understanding what another person is feeling, but also feeling along with them.
It can be contrasted with something we call sympathy, which is really feeling for another person. So empathy is considered to be feeling with another person, and sympathy is being able to feel for another person. And then the other important definition is compassion. Compassion is not just feeling with someone else and feeling their emotions, but wanting to move to action, to do something to help them.
It's one thing to understand the causes and consequences of feelings, but taking another step, helping them respond with helpful assistance can be really, really, really valuable.
Now, what do we know about the development of empathy? Well, actually, we've learned so much in the past few years. They've done research looking at infants within the first 24 hours, and what they have found is that infants will start crying when they hear another infant's crying, but will actually not start crying if they hear a tape recording of their own crying. That even 18-month-old young toddlers are shown to help someone else with no expectation of reward.
Far away from being egocentric, young children are already very sensitive to the sight and sound of other people's experience. And so that provides a very, very early foundation for empathy that, as parents and other caregivers, we want to try to cultivate in their early experience.
What we know is to be empathic, you actually first need to have emotion identification. For a child to have empathy, they have to be able to identify how another person might be feeling. Be able to say, are they sad? Are they happy? how are they feeling? And then you also must be able to understand why they might be feeling that way.
And it's especially true for young children who may be confused or upset by witnessing another person's emotion because they don't understand what its meaning is or why it happened or what its consequences are. And so there we are as an adult to be able to explain this to them, to walk this through. Janie is sad right now because she thought her father was coming by to pick her up, but he's late. And that just puts that observation of another child's feelings into an interpretive context, helps a child understand why Janie is feeling the way she is, and therefore begins to help provide maybe some ideas about what can be done to help Janie. Another thing we can do is to help children see others' feelings sympathetically rather than critically or dismissively. When Janie is sad because she's waiting at the door for her father to come, we empathize with Janie's feelings rather than saying Janie should find something else to do. When we watch somebody fall down, trip over something on the floor and skin their knee, we are sympathetic because we know that can happen to anybody. We don't say, she should have been more careful. And it's in those ways of interpreting another person's feelings that we establish in the child a sympathetic mindset rather than a critical or dismissive mindset as they are watching the feelings of other people. Part of what we're talking about here is a third way in which, as adults, we help to promote empathy in young children, or really in children of any age, and that is to strengthen their perspective taking. So what is perspective taking? Well, it's basically the ability to walk a few steps in another person's shoes, to be able to see the world from that person's point of view and to experience it the way they are, even if just for a moment. And that perspective taking is a really important component of the ability to empathize with what that person might be feeling at the moment. Now, you can encourage that perspective taking in different ways with children of different ages. One of my favorite ways of doing it when my children were young was to do it with pretend play. And so you would be developing this wonderfully exciting storyline with your children, and suddenly one of the characters, might be you, it might be somebody else, falls and skins their knee, or has a disappointment, or gets angry because of something that happens in the story. And in playing out that story character's feelings in a pretend context, it can be a wonderful arena in which to help your child gain the perspective of what that other story character's experience is like.
Another aspect that's really important for the development of empathy is actually to help children develop a caring identity. So when children are helping you, when you get them to help you do different things, turn to them and say, "You are such a helpful child. You are so kind and caring. You have so much empathy," to really help them developing that identity. So often as parents, we might focus on when they're not doing the right thing, when they're not following the rules. But how often do we actually look at them and praise them when they're doing something kind and helpful? One thing, if you think about the roots of empathy, being able to identify and label emotions, think about ways you could use literature, use books, and talk about, as you're turning the pages and talking about stories, point to faces and say, how do you think that person is feeling? Why do you think they're feeling that way? When do you think you felt that same way? And how would you feel in that situation? It's lots of opportunities to use those types of strategies to help children learn those skills that are critical for the development of empathy.